Thank you for being here. Today we're going to learn with Sister Barb, Communal Discernment, Searching for God's Way Together. It is my pleasure to introduce her. Sister Barbara Quinn is a spiritual director, retreat guide, and educator. She is a member of the Religious of the Sacred Heart, an international community of sisters founded in 1800 in France. Between 2011 and 2024, she served as Associate Director of Spiritual Formation at the Boston College Clough School of Theology and Ministry. We are so grateful for her 13 and a half years of service to our school. Sister Barb holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from Rosemount College in Rosemount, Pennsylvania, a Master of Divinity from the Weston Jesuit School of Theology, which is now the CSTM, and a Doctor of Ministry with a concentration in spirituality from the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. Sister Barb has taught on the elementary, college, and graduate levels. She served as the principal of an elementary school, a campus minister at Dewville College in Buffalo, the Director of Ministry Development for the Archdiocese of Anchorage, Alaska, the founding director of the Center for Christian Spirituality at the University of Diego. She is quite experienced in her ministry. She founded a leadership development program and ministry for laity in Buffalo and Anchorage, and she has done formation work for her religious community and has been engaged in spiritual direction and retreat ministry for years, as well as giving talks and days of reflection for various groups. She's a great friend of CSTM Continuing Education, and we're delighted to have her here today. Please join me in welcoming Sister Barbara Quinn.
Thanks, Megan. It always makes me feel so old when I hear all that, too. Oh, I did do that. But anyway, it's just delightful to be with you today, and this is one of my very favorite topics. So I hope that I can inspire some love of this as I've been inspired, for sure. So we are at a moment in our world and in our church that's really unprecedented. We meet differing viewpoints and even stark polarization at every turn. And yes, dramatically so, as came across last week after the elections. But such moments also reveal the need for each of us to weigh in with our best truth and our most well-intentioned selves to help shape a church, a world, a school, a neighborhood, a family that reflect God's values and the desires of God's heart. The emergence of synodality, which means walking together, underlines the need and the call of all in the church and elsewhere to open our hearts into the guidance of the Spirit, so to speak with what we sense with honesty, courage, and love, to listen to each other's experience of the Spirit with openness and trust as we search together for what is best and truest for all. Think of what would happen to our parishes, our schools, our institutions if we really did that. It would be tectonic shifts. Our efforts to gather with each other around important matters can also undo or minimize a certain isolation or tribalism as we become privy to what others think and value and the multiple viewpoints that we represent. It also calls out our humanity. Oh no, there goes Herman again with the same old theme. And there's Viola, she just takes so long to express herself. As we're trying to listen to each other, all of that comes to play too. And the same goes with us. Our peeves, our biases, our whatever. The work, the discipline of trying to really listen to each other is really sacred work, and it's really hard work. How do we navigate the tension between honestly listening to people and our viewpoints that are so different than our own, while remaining centered and grounded in the core or the heart of who we really are as individuals and as communities? So in light of these current realities, it shouldn't be surprising to us that we call forth ancient practices that may help us navigate our way today. and that they assume a more prominent role in our faith communities, and yes, our professional and personal lives. Practices like communal discernment. So I want to ask you to do a little exercise today that will hopefully help this become a little bit more concrete, and that you can hang whatever I share, whatever reflections, on the concrete experience that you're dealing with in your own life. So for about 5 minutes, I'd ask you to reflect on a moment or a situation in your parish, your school, your workplace, maybe your family, where you face an important decision that affects the whole of you, and where people have differing and perhaps very strong and conflicting viewpoints about the direction to take, and you find yourself in search of a way to come to some kind of decision. So think for a moment, what would a situation like that be in your own life? What are some of the sticking points, the areas of resistance, areas of concrete disagreement? Are there certain persons who you imagine are not disposed to enter into a communal process, as the one we're going to talk about? And then ask the hard question, are you free and willing to enter into this process? So just take a few moments to try to bring some of that concretely to mind. Would anyone like to share an example of a tough situation that would lend itself to communal discernment? Not knowing what that is quite yet, but a place where it would really help to have a process to work through something that was kind of difficult. And you don't have to give the details of it, but just in our parish, for example, that was a good question, wasn't it? Okay, well, hold on to that. I'm sure you thought of something. And just hang on to that if you would, because we're going to be coming back to that. And to ask yourself, whatever the situation was that came to mind, what is so important about it? What is your hope in learning about a process of communal discernment that could help you navigate through some of those moments? And furthermore, what is the challenge of that? Okay? And then we'll come back to that. So let's move to the real concreteness of this. The preparation for communal discernment. Actually, to be honest with you, it's not easy to participate in the process of communal discernment. That's a fact. But it's very possible. If we are willing to partner with God's Spirit as we learn the language of God's Spirit, and if we're willing to do the hard work of knowing our true selves and what we're like and how we act and how we feel when we're acting out of our true self. It's hard work. The examen that our students led us in this morning is a perfect example of that. That daily work of really paying attention to what are the currents, the deep currents in us that go day by day by day, that give us real clues and real signals about where we are with God and where we are with ourselves. My thesis was on communal discernment when I was doing my DMin. And I was working part-time too, so I did this for about 4 years. Well, the final day, I was at CTU in one of the offices, and I was going to print out my thesis. I mean, this is like having a baby. So when I was there, the telephone man came in to fix the telephone right next to the desk where the printer was. And I said, "Sir, please, please be careful. This is like my baby." I said, "This is my thesis after 4 years." He said, "What are you writing about?" And I thought, how am I going to describe this? I said, well, it's trying to make sense of some decision and really noodling over it and going back and forth and then asking God's opinion about it. He said, "Oh, my wife and I do that all the time." I said, "You do? How do you do it?" He said, "Well, we have a little girl and we love her very much, and we're trying to decide what school to send her to. She has these needs in school. She's very good at this. She's this age. Her friends are here, there." So we're just trying to sort all of that out and think about what the most loving thing for her will be so that she can become her true self. I said, it took me 4 years to say that. And this man knows it. He knows it. And actually, it was the best thing that could have happened to me at the end of that thesis, because we do know it. I do really truly believe that we are wired for God. And that God's Spirit teaches us to recognize when we are in harmony with the knowledge of God's values and desires, grounded in Scripture, the wisdom and experiences of God's friends, and when we are in harmony with our true selves. We really know this. What I want to do is just give you some words and framework to recognize it, what's already happening. When those two things come together, our sense of harmony with God and our knowledge of God, and our sense of being our true selves as a partner with God, we engage in the art and the discipline of personal discernment. What we're talking about today is how we can join our personal discernment to the discernment of others who gathered together to work towards a common good. So you know so much of this already. So the big question is, what is the language of God's Spirit? If I learned anything when I studied this, this is the key for me. God loves and respects us as whole people. Mind, intellect, heart, affect, body, gut, action. How crazy would it be if God said to us, "I want you to work with me, and I want to work with you, and I want to show you the way, and I'm going to make it so hard for you to find it"? Be crazy. The thing is, God has wired us in such a way that we do know the language of God's Spirit if we can identify it. And this is what it is. It's in your outline there too. In our heads, God works with us through our heads too, our intellects. When we're in sync with God's Spirit and our true spirit, we know a certain truth and clarity. And if we're not in tune with our true selves or God's Spirit, we know the opposite. Not truth, but a kind of falsehood. I think we can kid ourselves about anything if we want to. I like to say, who am I when nobody's looking? Who am I really? So not truth, but falsehood, and not clarity, but a kind of confusion. Has anyone here had that experience? What does confusion feel like? Do you have your hand up? Good. Do you have a microphone?
So for me, confusion feels a bit like paralysis.
Uh-huh.
Like, I don't know where to put anything or do anything. Just the whole world feels out of joint.
Yeah, yeah.
That
All
would-
jumbled.
Yes.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I'm going to start by saying I'm Bob, a child of God. And I've been on a journey to identify that. I'm a big fan of 12-step programs.
Mm-hmm.
People who come together trying to solve themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't see that way. But that's the journey. And I've discovered who I am and everyone else is. We're children of God. And that's what's missing. All these false ways of doing things I've tried to keep up with. It's impossible. So it comes down to one simple fact. I'm a child of God. I can't lose that. I'm secure with it. And all I have to do is participate in it, realizing that. Thank you.
You hit the nail on the head. Thank you. We are a child of God. That's exactly, I couldn't have said it better. So thank you for that. Jane, you had your hand up.
When I sense falsehood or confusion, it often feels like I imagine you're in the center of a beehive that's swarming.
Mm-hmm.
That there's this confusion and your way forward is not clear.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of roadblocks, and so it feels very disorienting and dizzying because you are being swarmed by things that are not from God or not directing you back to God.
Great, thanks, Jane. That's a great description. It's very palpable. This is human stuff too, but that's where God works. So if we turn to our hearts, our affect, when we know when we're in tune with ourselves and with God, there's a real sense of joy and peace that we really feel, huh? And when we're not in tune, we're not in sync, we know the opposite. Not joy, but sadness. Not peace, but a kind of turmoil. How does that show up in us? How do those things show up in us? When I feel not joyful, but really sad, what happens? Not peace, but turmoil. Where does it show up in our bodies? Yep, Maureen. Here's a microphone.
I tend to lash out at those who I love
Okay,
and get angry.
okay, thank you. What else? How does the turmoil show up? Where? Let me just make sure okay, go ahead.
It leads to depression.
Okay,
You hide.
thank you. Bodily, where does it show up? With your orange sweater, were you going to answer? Physically, how does it show up?
Physically, it actually affects my brain, my memory, my purpose, my discernment, who to blame for things that are in conflict in my life. And this is around family.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get right to the decision that my son and his wife, who are both Catholic, do not follow the Catholic Church and will not baptize their baby. Therefore, no further sacraments, for example, of healing, which she needs, could be used. But I did talk to them and openly asked if I could take her to a priest who agreed to pray for her, for body,
Mm-hmm.
mind, soul, but not sacramentally, which to me is fine. It's the same thing, but
So your gut gave you the energy to go and do something.
Right.
Okay,
How do I work? I always try to find a workaround the problem or the issue.
thank you. Okay, thank you. Yes, all the way back.
Thank you. Very simply, I can't sleep.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Your stomach flip-flops, can't eat, or you eat too much. This is all really human stuff. And it's, anyway, and then for action too, our gut, when we really act on something, if this is of God and it's of our true selves, we know a certain courage and energy to do something, even if it's difficult. What has Garrison Keillor said? I get up and do what needs to be doing. It's an actual physical thing, huh? But if it's not on target with God, with ourselves, we won't know a courage, we'll know fear. We'll know not an energy to do something, but a paralysis. I can't do it. I can't do it. So I just pay attention to those things in your examen, because those will be the clues to where we're heading on the road towards God, towards our true selves, or away. Or, and I'll come back to this later, or it may not be time to do something. That's the other thing, okay? It might not be wrong, but it might not be time. And your whole self tells you that. So it's very important for those who are participating in a communal discernment to understand and trust this approach so that each one can really truly enter into it. I was on a board of a school one time, and the school was facing a very difficult decision about whether to keep one of the schools open or closed or close it. Well, there were 3 religious of the Sacred Heart on the board, and we were talking at one point and said, this is such a serious decision. We ought to use the discernment process for this. Barb, would you call the chair of the board and ask him? I said, sure. So I called the chair of the board and I said, John, we're really concerned about this decision, and we think a discernment process would be really important. And I could picture him in my mind's eye, seeing him rolling his eyes, oh, there go these nuns again. And I said, he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you do this and that. And I could tell I wasn't going through his door. And I finally said to him, John, it's using all the best business practices that we know, and then it's asking God's opinion about it. He said, oh, sure, okay, we'll do that. So we got a facilitator, we had the process, and do you know, at the end of the day, when the whole board was gathered, we came to a unanimous decision with peace and joy. It was amazing, because people really entered into what was going on. Now, it's not magic. It took a lot of work. But it really, to pay attention to that depth level is really what it is. The process of communal discernment. How are we doing on time? We're 10:40 now? Okay, so when do we have a little break? At 11? Okay. So the process of, excuse me just for a minute. So let's move to the process of communal discernment. Can you think of the instance that you were thinking about earlier and get that back first, right in the middle of your thinking here? Think about it. Think about the concrete circumstances of it, the players involved, what's at stake, what are the challenges, what are your hopes? Just bring that together for yourself. I ask you that to gather that because what's important is whatever question or issue you're raising, has to have a certain import, a certain gravitas to warrant entering into the process of communal discernment, because it really takes a lot to do this. Examples, I wish you could, if anybody is free to share an example of some situation that you're thinking of where this would really be helpful. Would you mind sharing that? Yes, all the way back.
I'd like to share maybe something happened like last month. That was my mom's birthday. And then we siblings, like they are all over in the United States. And then we were planning to celebrate her as a great mom and so on. So they came to me and then they say, oh, you Philomene, you will take care of the food as well as the room. And I said, fine. And what about you? Oh, no, we'll decorate and so on. And then I said, okay. But I said, knowing you, after the food and everything, you will leave everything on me. That, especially that I'm my mom's primary caregiver. And then they said, no, but we have children, but you don't. And I said, you know, if it's that, this is the way you want to celebrate my mom, I pass this time. Actually, you should give me a break because I'm here every day and you are not there. So, and then it was clear, although I love my mom, and I said, if it's only the thing that you want me to do, and I know not only to get the room to celebrate, and then all the cooking on me, and I said, that's not God's will, and I pass. So finally, they all decided to take part, and then this family bought food, that family, this, and then they said, you have the day off. And I said, thank you.
That's communal discernment, ended in a very good way. So think of another. Now you shared something that was resolved.
Yes.
But does anybody else have an example of something that's not resolved yet and could really benefit by communal discernment? It's not resolved yet. Yes.
How to make a multicultural community, intentional community, feel like home for people who come from various countries and places here in the U.S. and are here now.
And your question is how to do that?
How to do that. How to make it feel like home for everyone.
Are you talking about a specific location that you're already in?
Yes.
Okay. And who are you working with?
The Augustinians of the Assumption.
Who would be the players with you? Where you'd have
the members of the community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the challenge of that?
The different backgrounds and customs for the people who live there.
Okay. So it'd have to be a lot of working through, understanding each other. That's a great example. Good. Thank you. Somebody else? One more. Yes.
My parish came together as a result of 4 parishes consolidating several years ago, and they all had unique identities and personalities. And we've never taken the time to consider our new personality and identity. And there's a lot of hurt feelings and resentment, and we're starting to talk about how we resolve that.
Wonderful. That's a great example, because you're aiming for a very good thing, unity with each other, sharing God's values, but it's hard work. It's hard work. That's a great example. Okay. When you choose an example like that, or any example, it has to be an option between 2 things. It can't be, what are we going to have for our reception? It's not, what's our menu this time? It's something that really calls for a decision between 2 things. As Ignatian would say, between 2 goods. There has to be a clear-cut choice. It can't be, let's discern working out a timeline for our next meeting. It just can't, it has to be concrete. So before the process begins, you, the group, needs to know who has the ultimate authority for making this decision. Is it the pastor in a parish? Is it the president of a school? Is it the chair of an organization? In this case of a school board, it may be that they are the ultimate decision makers, because that's what their role is. But be sure that this question is raised before this process is undertaken. Unless the group enters into the communal discernment as a quality preparation, it takes so much time that unless you know where this is going, it would be utterly frustrating to people to get all the way to making a decision and then having it overturned. Let me give you an example. I worked at one point in a parish that was administrated by the Jesuits. And the diocese at that time was undergoing the process of deciding whether people would be in a collaborative or not. It's happening in Boston too. And so we were told at the beginning that we had the choice whether we would keep the school in the parish separately, independently as it was, or whether we would enter into the collaborative model. So I was on the parish council as a member of this staff. I was doing my thesis on communal discernment. So I said to the parish council, what do you think about using this process to come to this decision? And they said, sounds good, Barb. So we went through a year-long preparation for this, or months long. At every parish council meeting that year, we began our meeting with an examen to develop a foundation for the language of God's Spirit. An examen for our own hearts and an examen for our community, our board, our parish council. We reflected on the parish's history of sin and grace so that we could have a sense of who are we really when we're at our best or when we're not. That took some time. We said our self-knowledge about this parish, we're good at parties. And we're good at serving the poor. And sometimes we're not so good when we disagree with each other and we talk about each other. We really got down to concrete things about when we were best and true and when we weren't. Ultimately, we discerned as a community to retain the parish school as is, rather than join the collaborative. And the pastor that weekend, after it was really clarified among us, announced the decision at all the masses. Well, people stood up, they clapped, they just hoot and hollered. They were so happy about the whole thing. It was a wonderful thing. The next day, on Monday morning, the pastor came to me and said, Barb, I just got a call from the bishop, and he wants to see me tomorrow at the chancery. Would you come? And I said, sure. And he also asked the same thing of the chair of the board. Kathleen remembers this because we were living in Chicago together at that time. Well, we went down to the chancery on Tuesday morning, and the bishop said, you must join the collaborative. And we said, we were told at the beginning that we had the option to join or not to join, and we went through a months-long discernment not to join the collaborative. And he said, but what was once voluntary is no longer voluntary. Now, can you imagine the anger, the disillusionment, the hurt, the utter frustration of that? Now, it was an unjust thing to do. It wasn't honest. But the point is that we really went ahead with good faith, and then to find out that we did not have the authority to make that decision was death dealing. Know who the ultimate decider is. It could be, and it's legitimate. It's not that there shouldn't be decision makers other than a group, but we have to know who it is. Next thing, Begin first with the question at hand. Let's say in a school situation with the head of a school. The question would be straightforward: would this candidate be a good leader of the school or not? Straightforward, yes or no. A facilitator is really helpful in keeping people on track, because any question of import is something that can rouse a lot of feelings in people, a lot of different thoughts. It's just all human. The wisdom of the process is that each person must speak to the question at hand. And the wisdom is to take the harder side of it first. So for trying to decide whether this particular candidate would be a good head of the school, the harder side of that probably would be the reasons why not. We all love to be positive, but the reasons why a person wouldn't be good is a harder thing to talk about. So start with the harder option as a way of facing fears right up front. And give the pros and the cons of the question here. Okay, so the first thing, each person begins by sharing reasons why the first option might not be the best one. What are reasons against supporting this candidate as head of school? Now that's hard. If you really favor the person at hand, the discipline of having to say, these are some reasons why the person might be a weaker leader, that takes a lot of honesty and a lot of soul searching to be able to say that. I don't know about you, but when I want something badly enough, I can whitewash it. Oh, it's all good, no cons, no. Does anybody else ever do that? It's humanity. So to really be honest in this process, by taking every single person has to speak to one side and then the other, makes us really look and say, oh yeah, maybe that is a reason why the person wouldn't be as strong as another. Then we go to the positive side. Why would the person be a good leader? Somebody who is opposed, and I'm thinking of one situation where there was one board member who really was opposed to this person for a very specific reason. But that person also had to say, okay, I guess she really would be good for this, even though I don't want her, because of these reasons. We have to stretch, and some of that stretching means really being able to stand in the shoes of another person to try to understand their point of view. It's a very wise, freeing kind of a process, ultimately. There was one person on the board who really didn't want this woman. And it was really hard because he was the only one, to tell you the truth. But Pope Francis has made, in his commitment to synodality, has been adamant that participants in synodality speak with parrhesia, that is a bold and courageous freedom of speech. That takes a lot of grace. A bold and courageous freedom of speech. I really want to tell you what I'm thinking. He understands, and so do we, how people can be fearful or lacking confidence about speaking candidly in groups. You know, most of us, human nature shies away from being criticized or ostracized. And so many a person can be cautious about speaking the truth. Would you say that's part of your experience too? It's not easy to really be candid about what I think when I know a lot of other people think differently than I do. Oh, they're going to think, there she goes again, or there Herman goes with his one issue, and he can't get past it. The Spirit works through our best efforts to be candid and grounded in the truth. And the Spirit also helps us to be open and generous in listening to each other. That's all the work of the Spirit. I think I'm going to stop here. I want to obey Megan. I see her and Cara. we wanted to take a break for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes for coffee. And then we'll come back and finish this part up. And then I want to push you back to do a little work yourself again, okay? So we left off with the whole notion of the process of taking one option at a time, one side of an option at a time, and going around, but starting with the one that's most difficult. Saying against why I don't think this person would be good. And it really is very freeing. I've done that before. It's just really hard to have to say when I'm really committed to this person getting the job, to be able to say, here's a little weakness, so let's look at that. The other thing is that it gives a person who is against, doesn't feel that this option would be the best, the freedom to say that, and to really not stand out like a sore thumb, but really to say that and say as honestly as they can that these are the reasons why I don't think it would be a good idea. Then we flip to the positive side so that that person also now has to really look for the good. It stretches. It's a stretching kind of exercise. And everyone goes around then and says, this is why I think this person would be a very, very good candidate for head of school. And you'll listen to that. And at the end, when we really have listened to each person, pro and con, then the third round is, what did I hear? What do I think is the best option for this school at this time in light of our mission, God's values, my deepest self? When everyone goes around again, if it's a unanimous choice, hooray. If it's not a unanimous choice, and sometimes it's not, for example, in the instance that I was telling you about, one person who really did not want this one candidate, the person can offer some addendum, alternative, whatever, to stretch the question a little bit and say, I could support this person if. Maybe it is giving them a little bit more money, hardly an example, but maybe giving them a little bit more money because they're so well trained and they're so experienced, etc. Could we manage that? Then the group has to say, can we live with that addition? If the group can't go with that, then it moves to a vote. And then the issue is resolved. Now, when you think of that, unless it's really a clear-cut division, a pro and con, half and half, chances are it still moves towards a peace in a decision because everyone has put his or her cards on the table. And it was clear that the spirit was leaning towards the side of saying this person would really be good. And if one person has an objection, that's heard too, but it doesn't sway the whole thing. It's a very freeing process. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Okay. I was just telling Megan before, I'm having a very hard time with this podium as it is, because I'm used to looking down at something, being able to look at you, and I feel like I'm going up and down, so I hope that's not too distracting to you. So what I'd like you to do is, we have time for table sharing too. This is really hard work, and I would really ask you to think about your own commitment to something like this. First commitment is to the inner work that each of us is called to do, to really keep growing in understanding, knowing, feeling God's values. It means doing the hard work of diving into Scripture, of really trying to listen to the readings wherever you go to worship, to really not doing a drive-by, but to really chew on it and try to understand who is God, how does God work. Spiritual direction is also a very, very key thing for that, to really dig in and personalize these kinds of, a knowledge of God, and how that's showing up in my life. You know, lots of us have hard things to go through at different times in our life. And a great temptation, I just talked with someone yesterday who said this very thing. Why did God do that to me? Why is God so tough? Well, that's an image of God that needs to be worked with. That's not the image of God from Scripture. God can't do enough to love us. Can't love us enough. That's the image of God that God wants us to have. So the inner work of really coming to know God's values, God's desires, to know values of mission, whatever the instance is. If you're working in a parish, what is the mission of the parish? Maureen is, right? Your group is going to have to do that. These two groups coming together have to dig down and say, what is our set of values that we've been living with? What is the history of the community we've come from? What are the graces and what are the sins of the community? Not a one of us is perfect. So can we look at that and name it? And then really try to say, okay, can some of these things be corrected? Or are some of these things just the way they are? And how will we live with them in life-giving ways? To really examine our own personal values. Again, I'm so happy that the students and Krista started with the examine this morning, to really go through the day. And frankly, at least I'm saying this for myself, I think it's a hard prayer. Number one, the discipline of doing it every day. I don't always do it every day. I'm not so good at that sometimes. But to really, really pray that and say, where was I at home with myself? Where was I not at ease with myself today? When I snapped at that person, why did I do it? What got on my last nerve? The other thing, I wanted to say the other day, earlier, sometimes when those language of the Spirit aren't lining up the way we would like, we have maybe a truth and clarity about what we think it would be. We have courage and energy to do what we need to do if it's right, but we don't have a peace and joy. What's going on there? It's really important to look at head, heart, and gut. I had my own personal example of that when I made what I think, what was the hardest decision I ever made in my life. And I worked at it for a long time and really prayed and really sought, somebody who was wise enough to help me with it. All in that. I mean, it took me, I'm saying 10 years with this decision because it was a life decision. And I got to the end and I thought, I think I know what's right. In my head, this was right. In my heart, I wanted to do it. I had a desire to do it. And I got to the end of a 9-day retreat where I was really basically saying, God, this is my decision. What do you think? Just to get the A-OK. And I couldn't do it. It was the most confusing, just upsetting thing that I went through. I thought, I thought I was going crazy. But I knew I couldn't do it because I couldn't do it. So I walked around for about a month. And every night I would go down, I was working in Anchorage at the time, I'd go down to Lake Hood with the float planes, begging God to show me the way. And do you know that one evening I was walking along and I found myself sliding into this meditation, kind of imaginative meditation about the sower and the seed. And I imagined myself sowing seed with this one option, right next to Jesus. And there I was. I'm a good scout. I was sowing the seeds with abandon and, really, really giving it my all, doing what I wanted to do. But I'd had no smile on my face and I was sweating bullets. And I thought, it's not me. That is not me. And then I turned and sowed seeds with Jesus with this other option. I was doing the very same thing. But this time I was upright, and I was smiling, and I was doing it with abandon. I was just joyful. And that was it. And the thing that was so instructive to me during that time is during that brief time between when I couldn't do it and when I came to a resolve about being happy to do it, somehow I sensed God saying to me, Barb, I don't give a hoot what you do, as long as you're yourself and you're free and you're loving. And it was one of the moments, the moment of deepest, deepest freedom in me that I have ever felt. So there's something called, with discernment, the liminal time. It's neither the betwixt nor the between. You're sort of on either side, and it hasn't quite settled in yet. It's one of the most important times of making a decision. Because during that time, wisdom comes in a way that doesn't just happen in my head or my heart. It's something given to us too. So know that about communal discernment. It may be, or personal discernment for sure. It may come a time where you've really done your work, but something's not quite there. Don't rush past it, because there's great, great wisdom in that, whether it's a group or individual. The other thing about the hard work of communal discernment is we're no longer working as a free agent. I don't know about you, but I suspect some of the people in here have strong opinions. Would that be right to say? And it's not easy to kind of button up and really listen to another person and other people and suspend my ironclad opinion about something to really listen to another voice and other voices. We've got to do that kind of work, and it's hard work. As Bob was saying before, that's the formation, the transformative power of being our true selves and being a child of God, but also letting the Spirit help us grow and develop and change. So thank you for that. The other thing in working as a group is to really be aware of our opposition, our reactions, our resistances. It's normal, it's human. But if we're aware of them, then they don't trap us and imprison us. So, okay, your turn. I would love it if you could take your situation again and think about how you could use this process of communal discernment. Maybe it's in your family. Now, I can see kids rolling their eyes if you started going through these steps with them. But it could be with a grown family where there are some pretty tough decisions that have to be made as families grow along. It could be your workplace. Now, again, you probably would have to be in an atmosphere where people understood this kind of value system, for sure. I doubt that you could go into your insurance company and say, let's do a little communal discernment. You might find yourself relegated to another position. But you can do it in faith-based groups. You can do it in a school like BC. You can do it in a school like a high school. That's where we did a lot of these exercises. And people were awkward at first. That's part of it. But then to explain it and just give them some time to practice through it and really put their finger on what does this look like concretely, it eases people up and gives them a chance to try something new that is really, really helpful. So think of your situation and how this process could be worked there. And what are some of the questions you might have, or some of the resistances you know you'd be up against? So I want to give you about 10 minutes to be quiet with that and just really try to dig into it. And then at 11:30 we will, 10:30, what, 11:30, we'll come back and just have Q&A or any comments that you have about this process. Is that okay for you? Okay.
My own discernment led me to really relying on imagination.
Mm-hmm.
I was asked to do something that just did not feel right. And yet it was the president asking me. So there was a little power and pressure.
Yeah.
But when I imagined myself in the situation, what probably was very bright and lightsome and full of possibilities, it was a dark house, dark room. It drained me of any life. So it was not a long discernment, not the imagination is
Yeah.
what helped me.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I mean, it's what I was describing too about the sower and the seed, the imagination. Why is that? The imagination cuts down out of our heads only and goes to a very deep, deep human place in us that tells us a lot of wisdom if we just listen to it. It's not all logical. So that's a great example. Thank you. Yes, back there.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, and I'm curious to know more about the importance you mentioned as when you come to communal discernment, you really should have two options in mind already. And so it made me think about, there's a discipline about that, to be able to come to the table and name those two options, because what you're naming shows where you are in the trajectory of perhaps bigger steps of discernment to come. So I think of, for example, Maureen's, we're 4 parishes coming together and we need healing, and we want to come and talk about those. So those are great. You could come talk about that. You could have listening sessions. But when you come to a point of communal discernment, you have to have two options. So I think at some point, they'll need to distill all the issues at hand into what are the two options at this point in time in history. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if you can speak to that. How do you distill, sort of broad concepts into further discernment to then name the two options that you bring into deep discernment?
Well, what's your first name?
Bernadine.
Bernadine. What you're describing is right on target. And it's distill is a really important part of it, to really listen and do the homework of saying, what is at work here? And what are the things that are really essential and what are not essential? But then I think to say, I'm going to turn this over to Maureen, to say with the 2 parishes that are coming together, what would you name as 2 options about how to blend? Because I think it has to come from the people involved in it. It's not a theoretical thing. Can you think of anything, Maureen, that would be 2 questions, 2 options that you would have in that?
Well, you kind of put me on the spot here, Barbara.
I did, but I knew I could.
I have to meditate on this. It's not something I can think about right now, but there's a lot of things that have to be brought into my thoughts, and I'm not the pastor. So I think the Holy Spirit's going to have to lead on this one. I'm sorry, I can't answer.
No. I did put you on the spot. The ultimate authority is with the pastor, ultimately. There's one thing that's coming to light there. But I think if the 2 groups are working together, chances are, over time, in talking with each other, certain values are going to rise to the surface. And some of them may be conflictual. One parish may really lean heavily on social service. We want to set up a soup kitchen, or we want to set up something for the poor. Another one might say, we have this priority of really evangelizing, educating the people in our parish, which takes it in a different kind of a direction. Now, are they conflictual? No, not necessarily. Are there reasons why they might be in competition with each other for resources, for personnel, whatever? Maybe. Then you start to get into the communal discernment. What's the priority for us? So it does entail doing a lot of hard work. What's the history of our parishes? What's the charism of our parishes? Where's the energy that's left over from having to blend? Where's the hard thing about that? So you're asking the right questions, but it's the people involved who have to answer it. Okay? Thanks, Bernadine. Anybody else? Question, comment? Yes.
Going back to the first step in the discernment, the asking the reasons why not. I mean, how do you build the trust in that group to be able to ask them to speak openly? Like, that seems like a big jump to me. To like, if I was to sit around this table and say, well, we're gonna have lunch together, why not? You know, that we don't know each other, we don't have the trust.
Well, you're right. And that's why it takes a long time. The preparation for this takes time. It can't be just, oh, this is a good idea, let's try to do it this way. It may take months to get to the point of being able to trust each other enough, to understand the process enough, to value whatever the decision is about that warrants the energy and the time that goes into it. It's all of that. There's no way you could ever do it second time you meet. There's just no way. And plus, people have to understand that there's personal preparation involved in this that also takes hard work. Although I do believe we are wired for God, a lot of people wouldn't say that. They might, maybe some of us would not say, what do you mean by that? You know, there's no way that I have the instincts of God. What? So there needs to be an education, a gradual maturing about that, so that there's a trust in the process itself, because we're the workers. We're the players in this, listening deeply for God, but listening for deeply within us too. So it just takes time. With different groups, for example, the school board, they have been working together for 1 year, 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years, some of them. So there was an atmosphere and a foundation for it there. But if they didn't have that, couldn't do it. And I think the other thing is it also develops a certain respect and liking for each other that allows us to be a little bit more vulnerable. So it's not an overnight thing. Yes?
In the event, the ultimate authority is unclear. Can you give us some strategies for how to determine who that would be, or how to develop one in the event a person doesn't already exist?
What's your first name?
Nick.
Nick, could you give an example of a situation you're thinking of?
So there's, let's say a project has been delegated to a group, and by the person who delegated, there was no person put in charge. 4 people were put in charge, for example.
And so your question, the ultimate question then is, what are you deciding?
Yes. So how do we then decide who is going to be responsible for making the final decision, given that the delegate has promised they will take any final decision?
So that's not really a communal discernment then, huh?
Oh, sorry, no. They have there's one person in charge who is delegated to a community. They have not put, and in that community, they have not put one person who wants to make the recommendation. The community then has to make the recommendation, but the person in charge is not going to be involved in the communal discussion.
Okay.
So how do you come to a conclusion of, like, in the event that there's the ultimate authority? Where do you find authority in the event that these people are multiple stakeholders who have to make one decision?
So you have been delegated to work this out,
Yes.
but the person who delegated is the final decision maker?
Yes.
Okay. So then within your group, what you're doing is just trying to come to the best wisdom you can about the situation, and then represent that to the ultimate authority?
Yes.
Is that what it is?
Yes, but the ultimate authority, so in the structure of the system, they've assigned a bunch of equals to make a decision.
Yeah.
They're in charge. But they will. But they want them. But in the but if they can't, if the equals cannot come to a unanimous decision, they're not going to make any decision. How do we come to, like, how do you deal with that? That is to say, the ultimate decision maker is not in the actual discernment process.
It's a little bit hard to know what to say without knowing the specifics of it. And then I'm not putting you on the spot to talk about the specifics, but I think with a communal discernment, you do need to have people who are invested in the decision, who do have a voice in the decision, and if they've been delegated to try to come to the best wisdom about this situation, then they do have that, then that's when communal discernment comes in. Then they have to represent it to the person who delegated, and that person could say, I don't like your idea. Is that right? Okay, so the biggest question you have with that is what? Okay. 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 Okay, so one person's voice got heard over the others. Okay. Were the conditions there for a good communal discernment? That's real. But how, if you want to go into a decision-making process with the expectation that you're going to come to some kind of consensus, then you really need to lay the groundwork for that. And with a lot of structures, they're very hierarchical. A lot of them, very hierarchical. And so there needs to be a lot of education about, in this one moment, we're going to try to do it a little bit differently and really have all of our voices count and maybe come to compromise so that the best judgment of each of the people gets factored in, rather than the thing that happens a lot of times in situations. Well, I've got more power than you, I have more authority than you, so sorry, we're going to do it this way. That's not what we're talking about here. So think about that anyway, about the mentality of the people coming together for the decision. Is there a readiness and openness to really blend your best wisdom for one option? That would be a way I would say it. And if there's not, then the reality is you've got to work with the reality. But that would take a lot of work. And in some work situations, that's not part of the mentality. So you have to just look at that and be honest about it. I don't know that I was helpful with you, but.
We're all equal in this. So why can't we come to a consensus? And if we can't, why don't you make the decision for us, listening to, like, agree to disagree, and somebody has to. I mean, it could be 3 against 2. So do we agree to agree on that? And if that doesn't work, can't you make a pre-existing rule that someone eventually has to make a decision? So it's either us or it's either you.
Well, you tap something, maybe one of the mentalities that comes from this process that could help is that rather than say no to something, is there some wisdom in what you've said that we can factor in, that we can start to blend it? That would just be a different mentality. And the bells are going off. We're going to do one more from the online audience. Okay, good, great.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of combine a couple of questions here that are asking a similar thing. So you mentioned that in order to do this communal discernment, it helps to have this sort of binary either or choice. And so kind of the two questions are, can you still have like discrete choices, but maybe like 3 or 4 to choose from? Would that work? Or are there other things that you can do with the discernment process that's more open-ended that maybe could eventually lead to an either-or choice?
I think it's up to the group to kind of structure that. If you had 3 or 4 possibilities that you really want to look at, it's not that you can't look at them, it's a matter of process. How do you want to structure them? Do you want to take one at a time? Do you want to take 2 at a time and say, of these 2, which is the priority? And then sort of whittle them down from there. That's a way to do it. And the group, so many groups have such imagination and such creativity. I would trust that with a group. The other one, James, was what though?
Is there a way of starting it that's more open-ended and then maybe working towards having a more discrete, concrete choice?
Well, the open-endedness, I think, is part of the preparation for the discernment. That you need to talk things out and not rush to a decision before you've really had a lot of conversation about something. So maybe it's a question of timing. When people have had enough time to really talk something through and look at what they're really looking at and what their priorities are that are surfacing, then you can come to a discernment about whether this is the way to go or not. So it just takes a lot of work. But I think to lay the groundwork by just looking at in a more open-ended way, eventually, if you're, again, paying attention to God's desires, the mission of the group, your own freedom, it will gradually whittle down, I think. Anyway, hope that was helpful a little bit. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Sister Barb.